If you were paying attention to the news back in the halcyon days of 2011 and 2012, you likely remember hearing a lot about one specific drug, bath salts. These inconspicuously named compounds became a media frenzy as they were involved in a series of increasingly bizarre and horrific attacks. This all culminated in 2012 with the Miami zombie attack, in which one man, apparently very high on bath salts, bit the face off of another man in broad daylight. This horrific attack embedded in the public's mind this idea that bath salts were a scary compound that will turn you into a cannibalistic monster. However, when you take a closer look at the whole incident, you start to see that it raises a lot more questions than it gives answers to. And why is that? Well, today we're going to investigate the incident itself, we're going to see how the media covered it and how it got so out of hand, and we're going to look at the truth of the matter, and hopefully learn something about media hysteria along the way. Let's delve in.
Drugs known as bath salts being blamed for a gruesome scene in Miami.
It was May 26, 2012, in Miami Beach, Florida. Hot, humid, and miserable. A pretty typical day in the Sunshine State. 31-year-old Rudy Eugene, a worker at a local car wash, was driving towards the MacArthur Causeway. He was headed towards the Urban Beach Week Music Festival being held in downtown Miami. Things took a turn for the worse, however, as on his way, his bright purple Chevrolet Capri broke down. According to security footage, 40 minutes go by in which Rudy paces around his car and does his best to get it back up and running, with little success. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Rudy calls his girlfriend, Yakvanka Bryant, telling her that he would be home late that evening due to this car trouble. Little did she know that this call would be the last time she would ever hear from Rudy. So it's after this phone call that Rudy's day turns from just an unfortunate happenstance to something truly bizarre and horrific. Now, the details of this part of the story are a little hazy. It's mostly from witness testimony. We know for a fact that Rudy starts to make his way, on foot, across the 3-mile span of the causeway, which is not an odd decision given the circumstances. However, what is odd is that as he makes his way across the causeway, he undresses, leaving his clothes along the pavement. So it's after a couple hours of nude walking that the stark naked Rudy happens upon Ronald Popo, a homeless man lying underneath the viaduct. According to Popo, Rudy seemed pleasant at first, the two having met years prior while Rudy was doing charity service for a homeless outreach organization. It doesn't take long, however, for this conversation to take a turn for the worse. Popo described Rudy as descending into a nonsense screed about Ronald stealing his Bible and being unable to score at the beach. This nonsense quickly escalated to open threats about Ronald, about how he was alone with Rudy, and how they were both going to die. Rudy then leaps on to Popo, beating him with his fists, removing his pants, and, most infamously, biting him in the face. This attack goes on for minutes before a passerby comes across the scene and calls 911. Responding to the call, Officer Jose Ramirez of the Miami Police Department arrives at the scene only a couple minutes later. Ramirez, who shows a surprising amount of restraint for a police officer, repeatedly tries to warn Mr. Eugene to desist from attacking Popo. But he's met with mostly silence and apparently a few growls. And it's after many of these warnings, and him genuinely doing his best to solve this conflict in a nonviolent way, that Ramirez discharges 4 bullets into Rudy's body, killing him. Overall, the attack lasted for about 18 minutes. Ronald was rushed to the hospital, having lost the majority of his face, including both eyes and his nose in the attack. Despite these losses, though, Ronald pulls through, and was able to recover most of his activities of daily living, and return to a semi-independent lifestyle. Additionally, the publicity from this attack leads to him receiving permanent free housing at a long-term care facility and even reconnecting with his estranged family. So that's the incident itself. It's a strange story, it's a scary story, it's a horrific story. And you can kind of see why it was about to make a big splash in the media. So, how did the media cover this story? And how did it get so out of hand? So before we talk about the coverage of this story, it is important to remember the context in which it takes place. 2012 was really at the height of the zombie cultural boom. This was around when The Walking Dead was hitting its rating peaks, when we had zombie movie after zombie movie hitting theaters. Zombies were everywhere, from video games to TV to YA fiction to card games. You could just not escape their cultural reach. So it was in this context, and likely due to this context, that this attack became national news. Headlines piled in about the Miami zombie. News stations focused on sensational details about how many times Eugene was shot and his apparent non-reaction to the bullets. He was characterized as a literal zombie, straight from a Romero film. It did not take long for people to speculate about what caused this attack to happen, with one perpetrator being thrust into the spotlight: bath salts. Bath salts, or synthetic cathinones, is the catch-all name for a collection of designer drugs nicknamed for their similar appearance to Epsom salts, actual bath salts. Although many of these drugs work in differing ways, they are generally classified as stimulants, meaning that they increase activity in the central nervous system and cause someone to feel increased levels of focus and vigor, at least when they're taken in reasonable doses. Commonly prescribed stimulants are Adderall and Ritalin, both used to treat attention disorders, with some common unprescribed stimulants being cocaine and MDMA. The connection between this attack and bath salts originally came from Armando Aguilar, the president of a Miami police union, just a day after the attack. He cited recent incidents of the crazed behavior he saw while people were using bath salts. This connection was backed up with an anecdote from an emergency room physician who cited a recent rise in the use of bath salts and the seemingly irrational, aggressive behavior of their users, calling the drug the new LSD, whatever that means. You may immediately have already noticed an issue with this connection. It is purely speculation. One day is not nearly enough time to conduct a toxicology report of the deceased. This being pure speculation did not stop the media from running with the story of this new street drug that turns people into zombies. Headline after headline ran with reports of this terrifying substance that will make you eat your neighbor's face, turn off your sense of humanity, and turn you into a crazed animal. And this is a narrative that is exemplified by this now infamous PSA from the US Navy, released a few months after the attack. This PSA, whose POV violence would make Prodigy proud, shows a normal US service member trying bath salts for the first time and turning into a violent, paranoid mess. He sees all of his friends as these creepy zombie vampire beings, all while some bad early 2010s dubstep blasts in the background. This really was the prevailing view across media platforms for what this drug would do to you. I certainly believed it at the time. Except, how true was it, really? It took exactly 1 month after the attack for Rudy Eugene's toxicology report to come back. And what did it show? Well, he had THC in his system, but at an amount that indicated he hadn't ingested it for at least 24 hours. And that was it. No bath salts, no cocaine, no any other drug that we traditionally see as harmful. Just an inconsequential amount of THC and a small number of undigested pills in his stomach. That was it. So, if not for bath salts, why did Rudy maim and attack Ronald? Well, we don't know. And we'll probably never know. Some have suggested mental health concerns. Some have suggested extreme religious fervor. Remember that Bible? And some, such as Rudy's girlfriend, have even gone all into the zombie angle and suggested that Rudy was subject to a voodoo curse. All of these are obviously speculation, and the real reason behind the attack will likely remain a mystery for the rest of time. So, if they had no involvement in this attack, how did bath salts become forever linked to this case? Well, as mentioned previously, we can trace this line of reasoning back to Aguilar, the police union president. Over the course of hundreds of interviews, he propagated the story of bath salts causing the attack, cementing it into the public's collective consciousness. Why though? What was the gain from sharing this baseless story? Well, That too we can't be sure of, but we could speculate. One theory is that it was an attempt to cover up the racial angle of this incident. Rudy Eugene was black, and Ramirez, the officer who shot him, was Hispanic. No matter how justified the shooting may have been, a Hispanic cop shooting an unarmed black man is not good PR, especially when your police department had a recent trend of Hispanic cops shooting unarmed black men. And especially when the biggest news in the country at the time was the murder of Trayvon Martin, an unarmed black child murdered by a Hispanic wannabe cop. It thus makes sense why Aguilar may have been trying to bury any mention of race in the story by propping up the drugged-out zombie angle. The media, in the midst of its zombie mania, picked up the story without knowing anything about the drug in question and ran with it, cementing in the public's mind the idea of bath salts turning you into an inhuman beast. This turn of events effectively scrubbed any racial conversation from this news story, turning it into a moral panic about drugs in our society. And what a moral panic it was. Stories appeared in just about every mainstream news source about the evils of bath salts. Classic moral panic stories emerge of people accidentally being dosed with bath salts and the horrors that ensued. It was a media frenzy. But even if this case didn't involve bath salts, surely they still have the same effects that the Union chief and doctor mentioned, right? They wouldn't just lie to us, right? Well, bath salts, as mentioned previously, are a stimulant. They make you more focused and give you an energy boost. Many kinds of bath salts interact with your dopaminergic system, creating a sense of euphoria. Additionally, like their cousin MDMA, otherwise known as ecstasy, bath salts can create a heightened sense of empathy and pleasure. None of this sounds like the scary demon nightmares of the US Navy PSA. Granted, there are downsides to bath salts. As with many novel compounds, especially ones consisting of as many diverse chemicals as bath salts, dosing is an issue. People can accidentally take too much of the drug, causing adverse side effects. The most commonly reported side effects in the literature are general agitation, followed by tachycardia, or increased heart rhythm, and anxiety. In small percentages of people, there are reports of feelings of paranoia and mild hallucinations, although nothing I can find reports hallucinations on the levels reported in the media. So no crazy vampire zombies, no eating your neighbor's face, none of that. Overall, they're like any other kind of drug. Something that can cause pleasurable effects when used responsibly, and negative effects when abused. So you just heard me rattle off about the effects of these drugs. But what about the anecdotes? What about what the Union chief said, and what about what the emergency room physician said? Well, for the physician, we can't really verify any of his stories. They're just anecdotes. But for the Union chief, we can. Neither of the two cases he mentioned actually involved bath salts. They both involved LSD instead. And looking at the effects of LSD, I don't think it was the primary culprit in either of them. So that's it. What's to learn from this whole bizarre set of events? Should you go out and take bath salts? Should you go eat your neighbor's face? Well, personally no to that first one, although hopefully you're an adult, you can make your own decisions. And definitely no to that second one. Let's try and avoid cannibalism as a whole topic. No, the true takeaway is that sometimes something that looks like a moral panic is just a moral panic. And when something like this comes up in the news, you should question it and try to understand the deeper truth behind it. I also think an important lesson from this whole event is that drugs are a nuanced thing. Although they can cause a lot of damage and harm, that's not their whole story. There's a lot more that goes into them than that. If you'd like some additional reading, I would highly recommend anything by Dr. Carl Hart, such as his textbook here, Drug Society and Human Behavior. I would also recommend some of his solo projects, such as Drug Use for Grown-Ups. His work covers this topic in much more detail and was really enlightening to me and a major inspiration for this video. Anyways, that's all for today. I hope you learned something from this whole misadventure. And I hope that you came out of this video with a bit more curiosity than you came into it with.